angels, well, fallen angels and demons. Are they the same thing? Are they not? I happen to be of the opinion that they are of the exact same thing, and I'm going to share the evidence to that point. And we have a guest tonight. We have Ronn Johnson, who is going to present that they are two different, distinct kinds of entities. Okay, so that's our basic thing tonight. Joel's going to kick us off, kind of get us started. So Joel, go for it, buddy. Oh, you all right? So we're going to hand this over to Ronn.
Off to Ron, but the main thing is
Awesome.
Ron represents Dr. Michael Heiser's Institute. So he's one of a few people that do that. And I wanted him on the show because I really want to do this discussion. And Doug is going to mop the floor with me. So whenever you people think that Doug is being cruel to me, say mercy, write mercy down in the comments. So Ron, please take the ball from here.
Yeah, this was one of Dr. Heiser's and my disagreements. I mean, it's not a big deal, I suppose, at the end of the day, but it's fun to have the discussion. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So Ron, thank you for being here, and looking forward to what you're going to present.
Well, very good. Thank you. And again, I don't know exactly where you're going to end up, Doug. So that's the beauty of this. We are, a cup of coffeeing, as I call it. We're going to do this over coffee and figure out through conversation how we agree or disagree. And that's the fun of this. That's how it was with Mike for me. We went back to our college days 40 some years ago, and the story of me meeting Mike, I've told it various places, but we found ourselves in a stairwell at midnight, and we talked until 5 a.m. and had a great time. And that's my first time I met the guy, and we became fast friends after that. So his journey through faith and academic stuff, and including his view of the gods and such, I was running parallel in a lot of ways to that, and had my own little world of discussions with him, and it was always fun. What was great about Mike is his ability, and I trust that's the spirit here, his ability to disagree and laugh and have fun with it, and never accuse his detractor of heresy. In fact, I knew I was onto something when he laughed. That means he had to think about it. So anyway, what I'll do quickly is go through a set of slides here, and I'm going to do it fast because people can review this then on these slides and catch my view of demons. So I call it the origin and role of demons. And like I say, I'm going to move fast and offer ideas that I certainly welcome pushback as you'd like. Number one, and I put these in numbers just so I can keep my thoughts in order. Number one, the Hebrew word Elohim is used in the Old Testament as a general descriptional title. It's not a name, of course, for personal beings who are understood to inhabit the non-physical cosmos. That's Mike's view. That's my view. We differ a little bit on how far that word can stretch, shall we say, but generally speaking, it's 2,600 and sometimes in the Old Testament. Our options for interpretation include English words like capital G God, small g God, or gods, plural, Godhead, spirit, deity, divine being, with each option often accompanying its own theological agenda. There's a reason why you may want one word over another. I found I was a pastor for many years, and I found myself using some words in some settings that would not just annoy the audience, right? The Bible uses Elohim as the most common title for Israel's head deity. Now, here's a point I always make going into this kind of discussion, and it annoys the crowd, but it also endears me to some people that are listening. To be clear, then, God, capital G-O-D, does not exist in the Old Testament. There is no capital G God in the Old Testament. Elohim occurs many times referring to the God of Israel. Interpretationally, we decided to put a capital G on that, but they did not have capital letters, and that's important for discussions about God and gods in the Bible. Now, that is given because, number two, then, demon, think about this, is a transliteration of the Greek daimonion, a relatively uncommon word. It's like 7 times in the Septuagint. To again then be clear, demons do not exist. Daimonia, plural of daimonion, do. In other words, to be fair tonight, I think, and I'll come around to the word demon at the end of my argument, but they didn't know what a demon was because that's an English transliteration from a Greek word, right? So they are talking in terms of daimonion or daimonia, and we later turn that into an English word. So, for example, these are 3 3 verses out of the Old Testament Septuagint, where I'm grabbing them to show where the word daimonia occurs. Deuteronomy 32:17, they sacrificed to daimonia that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods they had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. Psalm 96:5, for all the gods of the peoples are daimonia, but the Lord made the heavens. And also in 106, they did not destroy the peoples. They mixed with the nations. They sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the daimonia. So I'm not wanting people to make the temptation or go with the temptation of turning that word into demon yet. We'll talk how that can be done, but for now you have to leave it with the Greek word daimonia. And then you back up one step, number 3, and you find that the Hebrew word shade is behind 2 translations of daimonion. In fact, the only 2 times that shade occurs in the Hebrew Bible is Deuteronomy 32 and Psalm 106. So in and that's Jewish Publication Society for both of them, actually. This is how they, not the ESV, the second one, that's also the Jewish Publication Society. So here's how Jews read it. They sacrifice to shadim. So again, that's the Hebrew behind the Greek daimonion. Now it's shadim, plural of shade. And then the second one, again, they did not destroy the nations, but mingled with the nations their own sons and daughters. Oh, misspelled there, didn't I? Own sons and daughters, they sacrificed to shadim. So that should interest us. In fact, now I would say our question tonight is then, instead of saying what's a demon, to be fair to the biblical text, we have to ask it this way. What was a shade during the writing of the Old Testament? And then later, around 200 BC, what was a daimonion during the translation period when the Septuagint moved the Old Testament Hebrew into New Testament or Old Testament Greek, or, the cultural language of the day, Greek. Okay. And when you ask that question, what is a shade or a daimonion? Here's an example of and this doesn't count for much, but I think it's a good place to start. This is the Dictionary of Deities and Demons, a standard text that's good to have on your shelf. The original meaning of the term daimon, which is the original noun, from the time of Homer onward was divinity, noting either an individual god or goddess. So next line, in the Bible, the original sense of divinity is found in Acts 17:18, where Paul is described by pagan Athenians as a preacher of foreign daimonia. So the point of the dictionary is that, and it takes about 5 pages or 4 or 5 pages of material. In the first 4 pages talk like this. They eventually get into the view of this. And here's where Mike was. This is big on, Mike's doctrine of his demons book. That I'd recommend everyone read. It's very thorough. Here's kind of where he's coming from. Several Jewish writings during the Second Temple period tell the story of the origin of what we generally describe as evil spirits. Here's the challenge, by the way, like Enoch, which is what I'm going to quote here. We're not sure of the original language of the book of Enoch, First Enoch, for example. So was it Hebrew? Was it Ethiopic? Was it, it probably wasn't Greek. And so the challenge is that when we read this kind of material, we're not looking or finding or knowing where the word daimonion is. That's the challenge. But anyway, this is the story from Enoch chapter 15 that's recalling the story of Genesis 6. Now, the giants who are born from the union of the spirits and the flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, because their dwelling shall be upon the earth and inside the earth. Evil spirits have come out of their bodies. This is the view that, and Mike was all about this, that demons are the disembodied spirits of dead Nephilim that died, of course, during the flood of Genesis 6-9. And he gets that from this kind of passage in First Enoch. It's repeated in other Second Temple literature. And even then, the idea of unclean spirits is drawn from here into the Gospels. And Mike has a whole argument for it. And I'm not saying he's there. I appreciate the argument, but I've got another way of looking at it that now I'm going to get into, if that's okay. Should I keep moving along?
Yes, please. Absolutely.
All right. So here is the question. To me, this is what we have to ask. Are the daimonia mentioned in Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 96, and Psalm 106 the same beings as the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim who died in Noah's flood? To me, that's the question. Well, that's a big question, but that to me is how specific you have to be. And I think these are two different sets of beings for the following 7 reasons, and I'll go through them fast. The daimonia of Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 96 and 106 seem to describe beings that are being worshipped by Israelites as a result of Genesis 11 more than Genesis 6. So, this famous passage from Deuteronomy 32, when Yahweh separated mankind, he put them under the authority of B'nai Elohim, God-class beings. Repeated in Deuteronomy 29, described in Deuteronomy 29 even more clearly. They went and served other Elohim, those that they had not known and whom Yahweh had not allotted to them, which of course implies that some were, or he was. So that to me is the first argument, that when you listen to these verses again, they sacrificed to daimonia. It's recalling the story, not of Genesis 6. If anyone was reading this, my argument would be, and notice how 32:17 is right after 32:8 and 9, that the argument would be, or the natural connection to the daimonia of the Old Testament, and there are not a lot of occurrences, right? There's not a lot, like 7 of them. But those occurrences, when they're clearly talking about a set of beings that are spiritual beings, Elohim class beings, their mind will run to Genesis 11 and Deuteronomy 32, not to Genesis 6. That would be my first argument. Number 2, second argument, demon possession, as we encountered in the New Testament, think of Jesus, healing demon-possessed people, is never described in the Old Testament. You don't have demon possessions in the Old Testament where Elijah, Jeremiah, Isaiah are de-exorcising humans out of people, or de-exorcising demons out of people. Instead, the Old Testament finds non-Yahwists being, at least in some situations, susceptible to visitations of Ra, or evil spirits sent by God to torment them. And of course, you have the Saul story. I'm of the opinion that Saul was not a Yahwist, which is why God could do this to him. He could send a Ra spirit upon him. In other words, here's the argument. Number 2 quickly is, why don't we have demon possessions, New Testament style demon possessions in the Old Testament? It's because, in my estimation, the gods were allotted to the nations to rule over them, and that's what they were doing. There was no reason to come into people and do the things that we're going to notice in the book of, or in the Gospels. Okay. Number 3, demon-possessed individuals in the New Testament, on the other hand, think now all the way to Jesus. They seem to identify themselves as the gods of the nations that were promised destruction. So first, I'm going to just fly through the Old Testament verses that promise destruction on the Old Testament Elohim, the ones that were given rule over the nations. On that day, Yahweh will punish the Tzavaot, or the host of heaven. They'll be gathered together and they will be punished. Isaiah 34:2, the Lord is enraged against the nations, furious against all their Tzavaot again, or hosts, usually a heavenly host, and I'll argue that that's the gods of the nations. He's devoted them to slaughter. Zephaniah 2:11, the Lord will be awesome against them. He will famish all the Elohim of the earth, and to him shall bow down each in its place. In other words, those that are ruling over the earth will bow down to Yahweh in the end. Haggai, I will shake the heavens. Again, a promise that the nations and their gods are going down. Probably the most clear, Jeremiah 10, thus you shall say to them, the Elohim who did not make the heavens and the earth shall apelumi, perish from the earth. The reason I throw the Greek word in there is because here's my point, that when demon-possessed, this happens a couple times, when demon-possessed individuals meet Jesus, they'll say this line back to him as though they're quoting Jeremiah 10:11. What have we to do with you, Jesus? Have you come to apelumi us? We know who you are, the Holy One of God. So it seems like the daimonion of New Testament Jesus encounters, okay, the daimonia of Jesus moments, are playing the role very clearly of what the Old Testament gods knew would happen to them, and that is that they would be punished. Number 4, when Jesus and John's enemies claimed that each, Jesus and John, had a daimonion, Remember, they say Jesus had one. They say that John had one. They appear to be claiming that this otherwise normal person was being loyal to a competing deity. My point is that it just, again, if I say to someone in the New Testament, you have a demon, or no, not demon, I'm sorry, you have a daimonion, what I'm arguing for is that you're taking the other side of the loyalty question. You're on the wrong side of the Yahwist question. And it's bigger than just like a Genesis 6 issue to me. It's a which God are you being loyal to, Yahweh or the other side? Number 5, Paul warned the Corinthians that eating a meal dedicated to daimonia constituted idolatry. Again, much bigger issue than we often give it credit for, repeating the worship of pagan deities. This no temptation has overtaken you verse in 1 Corinthians 10:13. The next verse, therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. That's the temptation these people were facing as they walked to church on Saturday or Friday nights, I guess it would be. And they came across these Gentile sacrifices. And Paul's point to them was that if you do this, you're fellowshipping with daimonia, which would be equivalent to, from the argument of 1 Corinthians 10, the gods of the nations in the Old Testament. Number 6, Paul's opponents in Athens, and I brought this up before, thought that he was introducing 2 new deities, Jesus and Anastasia, into the city. And there's the verse. He seems to be a preacher of foreign. Now you'd expect the word theoi there, but they were content using the word daimonia because, again, to them, in my estimation, the crowd and Paul and others thought of daimonia as divinities or deities. He was preaching Jesus, and they heard Anastasis, and they thought that was a goddess, probably. 7, my last point, the 3 mentions of daimonia in Revelation each describe an apocalyptic vision on the end of this age when God's heavenly forces war against the hordes of Satan. In other words, this is a bigger issue than just disembodied spirits of Nephilim. This is the entire horde of Satan versus the entire host of God's side. So I'm not going to read the verses, but Revelation 9, 16, and 18. Again, I would put theoi there, or something like that, but they are content to use daimonia as a synonym, really, I think, for all the theoi that are against Yahweh. So in sum, based on the larger story, here's my argument, in general. I don't mind that demons could be thought of as Genesis 6 Nephilim that are disembodied, but here's my argument. Based on the larger story that's being told, my recommendation is that Shedim, Hebrew, daimonia, Greek, if you want to say demons, now's the time, are to be identified as the Elohim who were allotted to lead the Gentile nations as described in Deuteronomy 32. They performed this role during the Old Testament. That's why you don't have demon possession stories. They're doing their job. When Jesus came to earth, like the lights coming on and the cockroaches, scattering, they likewise took on human form to challenge Jesus' kingdom. So you had 2 human, you had interaction on the human level, both from God's point of view through Jesus, and you had an interaction from Satan's point of view through demon-possessed individuals. After Satan's defeat in the wilderness, they were often seen falling down before him in worship, admitting that he was the Son of God. And I had one more slide, but I don't see it coming up. All I say is, if Genesis 6 does have beings that are what Jude and 2 Peter describe as being chained in darkness or in Tartarus, waiting for the judgment of the final day. I take Genesis 6's beings as a separate story than Genesis 11 beings. That's all I'm doing is recommending that what happens in Genesis 6 is a story to itself. And then in Genesis 11 and 12, which is equivalent to Deuteronomy 32, that's when the nations are given their gods, and those gods are called daimonia.
I feel like you made my argument for me, so I'm not really sure
cool.
what to do.
So,
we can just drop the mic and we can just
go. Doug,
we can just go
make your argument anyway.
Okay, good. Well, I mean, if Mike were here, I would argue. I would laugh through this whole thing with him. So anyway,
I mean, because I think the major sticking point for a lot of people is First Enoch,
Right.
And I have an answer to that for why I would, because I also think that the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim are referred to as demons. But my take would be that that the Nephilim were created as a type of biosuit. These were avatars created for the Elohim, for the Daemonia, so that they could in some way incarnate, on this planet. And so I think we end up at the same place. When their bodies died, then their spirits had to, get out.
Yep.
So Joel, do I go now or do you go?
Yeah, you're supposed to go now. You were going to
Sweet. Okay.
argue against Heiser.
Well, okay. So I didn't do a PowerPoint this time. I got a bit lazy, but I did a paper, which I wrote. It says in Corrupting the Image 2, if you guys are interested, or you can go to my website that I put on in the chat there. Okay. So again, John, I think you did a fantastic job of pulling it all together. Ron, excuse me, pulling it all together. And I just, again, I think you kind of made the argument for me that that Daemonia and Elohim are basically the same thing. And what's interesting is that we never see the term fallen angel in the Bible. Okay, so this is where a lot of people, and I'm not saying that you're saying this wrong, but a lot of people want to say, well, fallen angels are different than demons, but they're not. Fallen angel is something that we, the church, have coined as a term to make a distinction between the good angels and the bad angels, right? We certainly know that Satan had his bad angels there in Revelation chapter 12. As you so correctly point out, the term daemon is a term for gods and divine powers. It's, God, lesser deity, unknown superhuman factor, protective deity of various sorts. You have, as again, you pointed out, you did all the work for me, appreciate it. So when Paul interacted with certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, some said he seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods, daemonia, again, referring to Jesus, right? Because the word daemonia, in its most basic sense, it means mighty ones. Okay, that's what daemonia means. It means mighty ones. And guess what the word Elohim means? Well, it also means mighty ones. Okay, so if Elohim Hebrew means mighty ones and daemonia Greek means mighty ones, well, then they're exactly the same thing. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily all good guys or bad guys. These are really neutral terms, just like we see the word Elohim can refer to the bad Elohim. It can also refer to the one true Elohim, which you correctly point out, there's no capital letters in Hebrew. That is something that the translators have done to help the English reader understand, which one we're talking about. But you can always know the difference because the God of heaven and earth, it's of course a plural noun, but it's always followed by a singular verb, and that's how you know how what that distinction is. Okay, so now again, you point this out, so I won't rehash all of this different stuff. But something that I think is really powerful is Philo of Alexandria. Okay, this guy was a genius when it came to Greek philosophy. He was a genius when it came to scripture. And he really worked hard to kind of marry the two and to show all the similarities between them. All right, so in his writings on the giants, he says, when the angels of God, that would be the B'nai Elohim, right, as it were, saw the daughters of men that they were beautiful, they took unto themselves wives of all whom they chose, those beings whom other philosophers call demons or daemonia, Moses usually calls angels. All right, so there we have a first century Second Temple, right, but first century source, a guy who's really smart, right? He's obviously a very brilliant Jew. I just want to point that out. He lived in Alexandria. And he was concurrent with Jesus, all right? And so he is calling them one and the same. So, again, we have all this really powerful evidence. The Bridgeway Dictionary, incidentally, confirms rebellious or fallen angels are variously known as demons, evil spirits, spiritual hosts of wickedness, principalities, powers, rulers, authorities, evil spiritual forces, cosmic powers of evil, and angels of the devil. All right, so these are all different kinds of classes. So the etymology of the word demon likely stems from the word dio, to divide destinies. Thus, the word could designate one's fate or destiny, or the spirit controlling one's fate. Now, for people that have read my book, Corrupting the Image, Volume 2, I go into a lot of time. I spent a lot of ink on the whole concept of Enlil. Okay, so Enlil, where do we find that word? We find that in Isaiah chapter 14, where he says, "Oh, Enlil, how you have fallen from heaven," right? Son of the dawn, right? "Oh, Enlil, son of the dawn, how you fallen from heaven." Now you guys are saying, "Wait a second, I've never read that in my Bible." Well, if you have King James or New King James or something like that, it probably says, "Oh, Lucifer," right? In others, it has different designations, but it's Hillel ben Shachar. Okay, so Hillel is the Hebraized version of Elil, which is coming from Akkadian. That's an ancient Semitic language. And that is getting it from Enlil, which is Sumerian, probably the oldest written language that we have. All right. Now, Enlil, he was known as Lord Wind. Paul references him as the power of the prince of the power of the air. Okay, so we already have that. And then Enlil becomes, well, Enlil and Elil, those are the same word, just two different languages. But in the Bible, when we talk about idols, one of the words for idols is Elilim. Okay, can you hear Elil, Elilim, right? Enlil to Elil, and then Elilim. It's the same thing, right? That's what's so amazing about this, is that the Elilim, the worthless idols, is a word for Satan. Okay, so we already have this incredible connection between these two, right? And I kind of got excited about that myself. So again, here it is, and so Enlil had according to the mythology, he had the ability to decree fates because he held the tablet of destinies. All right, and so because he held that, then he could decree fates. So these other gods or demons, as it were, also have the possibility, the ability to decree fates. And that's, of course, what we see is that the world was divided up, and these other gods had their portion over their part of the earth, and they could decree fates, right? So again, we're seeing a very similar thing here when it comes to Elilim being a reference to demons. Okay, and of course they're properly described as Shedim. Now, the word Shedim, according to the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, this is probably from the Babylonian word Shedu, a demon either good or evil. Okay, again, we understand that they're all evil if they're against God, but just roll with it for now. And pagan religions, the line between gods and demons is not a constant one. And this now explains why we see demons referred to in the New Testament as unclean spirits, to distinguish between the angels who kept their first estate and those who rebelled. We see the use of Shedim as gods, where God told Elijah to chastise the king of Samaria when he sought out the aid of Baal Zvuv, the god of Ekron, who incidentally was known as a Rephaim. Baal Zvuv, 2 Kings 1, is the healing deity. So, well, anyway, Prince, Lord of the Underworld in Ugaritic texts refers to Baal as a cathodic healer god. So in case you guys are wondering, the word Rephaim, Rapha is the same word as doctor or healer. Okay, so Rephaim probably refers to some type of healer or someone who's been healed. Okay, it depends how you look at that. All right, so in the Septuagint, Isaiah 65, Daimon renders the Hebrew name of the pagan god of fortune, Gad, where the Israelites are said to have been preparing a table for the demon. This conception of table fellowship with pagan gods who are in reality demons carries over into the New Testament, as Ron already pointed out for us. All right, so I would suggest that there's zero distinction between fallen angels, demons, and unclean spirits. Okay, now there may be rank and file within the general description. I think that's pretty clear. But these are all just different terms referring to the same general entities that we have in the Bible. So I really think that there's no reason to suggest that fallen angels, again, a term made up by the church, more recently, referring to Satan's bad angels and daemonia. What does daemonia mean? It means mighty one. What does Elohim mean? Mighty one. Okay, so they're exactly the same thing. What does Philo of Alexandria say? That other philosophers call them demons, and Moses usually calls them angels. Okay, and he's talking about the good guys and the bad guys. All right, so I just don't think there's any reason to make this distinction as our beloved Dr. Heiser did. Okay, and he, again, wonderful man. So, but insofar as the book of First Enoch, again, as you pointed out, we don't know, is it in Ethiopic, Amharic, is it in Greek? We're not really sure about exactly where this book came from. I think it's a very valuable book, but there are some pretty big question marks. But let's just assume for a second that what it's saying about the spirits that came out of the Nephilim is correct, that these are demons. Well, I don't challenge that. I actually agree with that. And so my solution is to kind of take a deep dive, again, Corrupting Image Volume 2, if people want to check it out. But what I suggest is that when God judged Satan and the angels that followed him at the fall, God put a veil between heaven and earth, right? I'm not going to go into all the scriptures, but it's in there. And they could not go through that veil except by some form of maybe, sacrifice or something. So there were different ways, but they couldn't just on average, come into this world without some kind of mechanism. All right. And before the flood, the whole idea that I think Satan cooked up was, hey, we can make this whole Nephilim thing. Why? What was the purpose of it? Was it just so that angels and women could get married and have kids and little picket fences? I don't think so. I think the point was for Satan and his crew to have bodies, avatars that they themselves could inhabit. And here's the benefit from Satan's perspective of having a soulless avatar, a soulless body that nobody else is inhabiting, is that guess what? You get to be the rightful owner of that body. Okay. When Satan went into Judas, well, Judas was still there, right? And, eventually Satan left him. When the legion went into that dude, well, it wasn't their body. It was that guy's body. The demoniac, as we call him, right? It was his body, and he got to have it back when Jesus freed him, and so there's something pleasant from a demon's perspective. There's something pleasant about being in a body. There's something obviously utilitarian about having a body that you can control here in this domain. And so that's what I think Satan was trying to do, is to create a bunch of avatars, biosuits, whatever you want to call them, so that they could have more than a foothold, right? They could have their own kingdom right here in this planet. And of course, when the flood came, those biosuits deceased, and the fallen angel spirits that were inhabiting them, had to say goodbye. And so now they are once again disembodied until we come to the time of, the mark of the beast. And that's a whole nother story. But I think Satan's going to try to repeat this story one more time. And I think to a lesser degree, I think he did this with Nimrod. I won't go into all that, but I think his basic strategy has not been changing. So I will yield. But again, angels, fallen angels, demons, exactly the same thing.
Okay. Ron, I'd like you to plug your organization just so people can find out, how to check out Mike Heiser videos or books or anything like that. So please plug it a little bit.
When Mike passed away, he was the founder, owner of what he called Miqlat, Miqlat. It's a Hebrew word for something. I forget what it means. And now his wife, Drina, is the president, and she runs the organization. It's a nonprofit, so it runs on the donations of people. They're associated with a. It's hard to call it a nonprofit that has one avenue. So right now, I'm doing a podcast through that nonprofit called the Divine Council Podcast the Divine Council Worldview podcast. It's a mouthful. So that comes out weekly, and I do that with Mike Chu. He's a Gordon Conwell graduate who's a delight, and he knew Mike well as well. So I guess that's the two main, or the main way that I'm involved. I also teach or taught some classes at what's called Awakenings School. That's a school that Mike started when he was in Florida, again, before he passed away, unfortunately. And that is now going online to be free for anyone who would like to use the classes. So it's, again, powered by donations. Awakenings, it's called, AWKGS, I think for short. I'm writing, Mike died just as he was writing. Well, he had written other stuff, of course, but he was writing a systematic theology book. And we had talked about this in the years prior to him getting sick, because I taught systematic in college for some 20 years. And so he is the guy who, loves to dig on the road, the gravel on the road, as it were. I was more in my ministry always the big road kind of guy. And so whether pastoring or teaching, I was the systematic guy. And so Mike and I were talking about writing a systematic and theology of the Divine Council Worldview, which is an interesting idea in itself. I told him when I looked at my notes, they weren't ready to publish as a book form. And so I didn't push that. But then when he died, Drina sent me about 3 or 4 chapters of material that he had written as a systematic. So I inherited that, and I'm busy doing that now. That'll hopefully come out next year.
Wow, that is awesome. That's very cool.
Yeah,
Doug, go, Scott.
I was going to say, one of the things I really listened to Heiser probably about 7 or 8, 9 years ago. Obviously, we're on this Prophecy Roundtable show, and he sort of I like the fact that he hated both systems of theology. Right. And I really wish he was around right now and we could have him on. And I think we tried to reach out to him a few times and because Doug and I, we believe that we have found the middle ground. No, seriously, understanding who the house of Israel is distinct from the house of Judah. And yes, we are certainly, no doubt, part of the kingdom now, so it's partially realized, but it's not what will be when Yeshua returns. And so I just don't know. It's sort of like I was listening to Dr. Michael, what's his name, Dr. Michael Brown today. He was had been debating a person on replacement theology, and I was amening everything that he said, but he cannot see that Ephraim became the fullness of the nations. He could not see that the northern house of Israel was divorced and was not even in the ballpark with the house of Judah and the kingdom of Judah. I mean, it's almost as if the division of the kingdom doesn't exist in the dispensational view or the replacement theology view, as opposed to, we formerly of the nations, we were without hope. We were without the covenants of promise. We were excluded from citizenship in Israel. But what tree are we grafted into? There's only one olive tree in Romans 11. Mm-hmm. And so in my mind, I wish Dr. Heiser was still around to discuss.
Yeah, it would have been fun to hear
his standpoint and how these prophecies can be literally fulfilled and applied to the literal house of Judah and to what I call Christianities and to the larger house of Israel or Ephraimites, which DNA never mattered because Caleb says, hold my beer. He was not part of the tribe of Judah, a DNA Jew, but he was placed.
You're losing me here, Scott. Huh? You're losing me.
All right.
Well, Caleb the Kenizzite was one of the 12
Oh, I see. Yeah, one of the 12 spies.
That gave a good report. And guess what tribe he was placed into? Judah. Okay. It's never been only about DNA. So anyway, I'm not going to have much to add on demons, but I wanted to add that.
Joel, are you you're doing your thing now?
As soon as I get my mouse to work, there we go. Okay. So anyway, thank you again, Ron, for jumping on the show and for presenting Dr. Heiser's opinion. I think it's a classic, a standard rabbinic thought that he found. And so I'm going to be adding my points onto what Dr. Heiser believed. And obviously I'm citing from him from 2021 here. Where do demons come from? And I think that he's correct. There aren't any direct revelations of demons. You know, in the Old Testament, the rabbis really didn't talk about it much. But keep in mind, they didn't talk to Christians or Gentiles about demons because it was such a...
Oops, we lost him.
Well, well, maybe that's a sign. Okay. We'll something must have happened to his internet because he disappeared completely. Let's take a few questions while we're at it. So this is a question from Mark. He says, isn't there a difference between the angels, giants, Nephilim, and Eliot? I'm not quite sure what Eliot are, but well, you know, angel, of course, is an English word, right? It comes from the Greek angelou, which just means messengers. Malachim in Hebrew, messengers. So it could be a human. It was most often some other angelic kind of being, okay? Nephilim probably means fallen or something like that. Could mean someone who is a feller, okay? So you young fellers. But this would be, you know, someone who makes something fall, okay? I don't know what Eliot is, if you mean maybe Elohim, perhaps. But again, some of it is more language. It's just Hebrew versus Greek.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Ronn.
I would say, and I tried to convince my college classrooms of this and I never succeeded. Give up on the word angel. Just give it out because it's too medieval in our connotations. We think of, you know, feathers and wings and the whole thing. Yeah. In the Bible, and I'm so glad you brought this up, Doug, it's just the word malach, which means messenger. And you're always forced by the text to ask, is this a human? Is it divine? We don't know. In other words, Genesis 32, you have Jacob meeting a camp of malachim. Does that mean it's divine or human? We're not sure. And you have to kind of go into the story to figure out, are these divine or human beings? So the point being, I find angel to be almost unusable because the very term angelic is a way of saying, it's just a transliterated word, right? So it's like saying, what is a cherub? Well, it's a cherub. What is a seraphim? It's a seraph. In other words, you're not helping the argument by just transliterating the letters over from angelos to angel. And you had in one of your verses there, it's good to see this, that there are numerous places in the Old Testament, Masoretic text, the original Hebrew, or the oldest Hebrew probably, where the Septuagint will drop in the word angelos or right on top of Elohim. There's numerous places this happens, B'nai Elohim or even Elohim, which tells the audience, anyone reading the Septuagint or 200 BC, that the Greek world was content to think, again, don't think angel. This is what I always say to my classroom. Don't think angel, think angelos. Yeah. That an Elohim and an angelos can be, well, maybe not the same thing, but the same class. And so I like to think of a UPS driver. When he's off work, his name is Mark or Bill. When he's on call or on the job, he has a name tag that says messenger. And to me, what an angelos is in the Bible, it's an Elohim who, when he's got a job to do, he becomes, hello, my name is angelos. And so if you meet a Gabriel, like in, is it Luke 1, and you can predict this based on what I just recommended. When Gabriel is asked who he is, he will never say angel, because who he is an Elohim, Gabriel, right? What he's doing is bringing a message, but
good word.
We really mess up the cosmology of how we think of the heavens when we have God at the top and then angels as a kind of a subset. In my thinking, it's all Elohim, among which there's a Most High one and many others, and the difference between the Most High and the others are created versus uncreated in my mind. But angeloi are any of those beings that would come down to earth at any time. So anyway, I just throw that out there as a category mistake that English has brought upon us.
So you have a similar understanding, like Heiser hated the English translation saints. And to that point, I would say saints and angels are number 3 and 4 on my list of what causes confusion. Number 1 and number 2 are going to be the term church and Gentiles. as opposed to ethnos being the nations and church being the congregation or the assembly. Because now we just got all this English understanding of what a church is.
I like that. Yeah.
Did you guys lose me? What happened? Was I frozen or what?
But we loved your presentation. It was great.
We solved everything.
Yeah.
Did you hear anything?
It was so good we didn't need you.
No, it was gone. Wow.
You checked out, man. You checked out. We're taking questions and we're having fun. Here's one.
Okay.
So this is from Shiny Man. Fallen angels are created by God directly. However, demons are the products of the illegal mingling of the fallen angels with the daughters of men. Thus, they're different. Well, Shiny, I mean, that certainly is the topic of our discussion tonight. I would argue vehemently against that view. I do not think that you have a new sort of being coming into existence. I mean, let's think about it. Let's kind of do some basic, I don't know, biology. Okay, when a man and a woman procreate, all right, what kind of offspring do they have? It's human, right? Now, when a human, and of course that human that comes from the man and the woman, what kind of spirit does it have? Well, it has a human spirit. Okay, now the human spirit ultimately came from God. I would liken it to sourdough bread. Okay, so sourdough bread, you can't just say, I'm going to cook some sourdough bread today. I'm going to bake it. You have to have a starter, right? And you got to take a little pinch of the starter and put it into the mix, and then the whole thing becomes sourdough. So I would suggest that when it comes to the passing on of the spirit of mankind from one generation to the next, there's different theories, but mine is more the what's it called? The transference versus the creationist. Okay. Some people think that when a man and woman make a baby, then God's like, oh, I'm going to put a spirit in them. I disagree with that. I think that that the spirit I have came from my parents, and I kind of got a little pinch from my dad, a little pinch from my mom, and voila, here I am. All right. And then I passed on a little bit of my starter, okay, to my kids, and then they'll pass on that starter to their kids. So this raises an interesting question. If a fallen angel and a woman, have relations, and then what is the spirit that's in there? And so the huge problem I have with suggesting that these Nephilim are this whole new class of being, insofar as their spirit goes, is that they are automatically assigned to a destiny of doom, to hell, whatever you want to call it, through no fault of their own. Merely from being born, they already assigned hell. And I just don't think God works that way, right? And so again, my suggestion, my solution is that Satan et al. Were creating a race of hybrids for the purpose of making avatars, very much like the movie Avatar, right? You know, that avatar being that the humans made didn't have its own soul until, what's his name, jumped in there. And then he possessed that avatar. That's exactly what I'm suggesting, is that Satan and company made a whole bunch of avatar bodies. How did they do it? Well, they mated with women, and then these women had this thing growing inside them, but it had no soul. And then when it came out, the fallen angel then possessed this avatar to become his own avatar. Okay, that's what I'm suggesting. So again, this whole idea that demons are necessarily this completely separate class of beings is not found in Scripture. Okay, the best that we have is from First Enoch. And again, I know Dr. Heiser, God bless him, would argue that they are a different class of being. I understand. That's why we're debating this. Okay, so that's my take on it. Ron, if you want to rebut that or whatever you want to say. And
thank you, Doug. Your view is different than mine, but it's not wrong. I'm just saying I hadn't thought of it, so I'm having to test drive your thoughts as I think, and I like it. I'm having been introduced to it for the first time. I'm having to think quick, as to how it all works. Can I ask some questions about your view, just Please. To clarify?
Yeah.
Did this happen again then in the Canaanite story? In other words, when it says "and afterward" in Genesis 6:4,
yes. Yes.
So does it happen again in the days of Joshua in your mind?
Well, I don't know so much in the days of Joshua, but what I would suggest is that because, Satan and crew got in big trouble with the flood, he found a different way to do it. So instead of angels coming and mating with women, what I would suggest, based on the text and a little bit of science, is that Nimrod became the progenitor of these new bad Nephilim. Okay.
In Babylon. So yeah, I mean,
Yes,
the Jewish tradition is that Nimrod was the architect behind the Tower of Babel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
His name means let's rebel, right? So Marad means let's rebel. Nimrod
Right.
is let's rebel. We find him as Ninurta in the ancient world, which means Lord of the earth. You take those same root letters, MRD, you get Marduk. You also get Martu, who is the god of the Amorites. And what does God say to Abraham? Hey, know for certain that your descendants will be slaves, and in the fourth generation I'll take them out, because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Okay, so by the time the children of Israel got to the land of Canaan, it was overrun by Amorites, which was a general designation. It was a umbrella term for the Rephaim, for the Zamzumim, for the Zuzim, for the Nephilim, for the Anakim, right? These are all different terms it's an umbrella term. Amorite was an umbrella term for all of those. And again, the god of the Amorites was Martu, who is Nimrod, all right?
So
and then Martu becomes Martes. Sorry?
Would Goliath and his brother be Rephaim then, in this sense? They would be of that race? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So how I understand it from a scientific point of view, there was a guy named Chris from Reno, Nevada, who had leukemia. He got a bone marrow transplant from a guy in Germany, and this forensics lab was tracking him, and they found that the DNA in his blood began to change to that of his donor. The DNA in his semen began to change to that of his donor. I mean, it's pretty wild, right? And he's on record saying it's pretty wild that I can disappear and somebody else can appear genetically in my place. So, I think that Satan essentially overshadowed. I don't know the exact mechanism, because I wasn't there, but I can deduce a few things based on text and some science. Sorry?
Babylonian CRISPR technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quantum physics of some sort, but again, I digress. So, again, I think Satan overshadowed Nimrod, with the promise that, hey, you'll become a god or a demigod, and the ancient record suggests that Enlil, Satan, had a son, Ninurta. Okay, this is not in the Bible. This is in the ancient literature. Enlil then gave the Enlilship, that is the right to rule, to Nimrod, or Ninurta. He had the tablet of destinies, by which he had the authority to decree fates. Okay, again, that was one of the word of the Elilim. And so Nimrod became the epicenter of the ancient world because Satan imparted that to him through this genetic bonding, if you will, or this quantum fusion, whatever you want to call it. But there was something radical that happened there. And of course, at Babylon, what were they trying to do? Well, Bab El means gate of the gods. And I think they were trying to open up a portal so that the fallen angels could come through in some bodily form, and they could do their whole thing again, right? And God put the kibosh on that, just like he did back in the days of Noah, right? Because it was a pretty big deal. But still, Satan was able to kind of get through, so to speak, through Nimrod. And then Nimrod, again, he's Marduk. He's Martu, right? The god Mars comes from Martu, right? They're all the same dude, right? So, when you start to look at it linguistically and you just start connecting dots, you're like, oh my goodness, it's crazy. So that would be my solution. But,
what do you guys do with the fact that in Ephesians 6:12, it talks about all of these creatures and everything like that, but there's no demons listed there.
I was going to mention that
Thank you.
that quandary too. That Paul's, as it 6 times he mentions principalities and powers. What, an honest question that I don't know the answer to. Why doesn't he bring up daimonia in those lists? He has, rulers, authorities. Even he mentions in Romans, angeloi as a possibility, but he leaves out daimonia. Any thoughts there?
Well, I think it's not so complicated, honestly. I think it's just, there are the bad guys, and amongst the bad guys, you have generals, you have colonels, and you've got sergeants and all these other dudes. Like they're just different ranks. Okay, they may look a little different. They don't necessarily all have to look the same, but there are different ranks within the tzvaot, as you mentioned, the hosts, the bad guys, of Satan's cabal. Different ranks, and so that's what.
What is this you have up here? Why didn't Daimon make this Ephesians 6 list?
That's what I'm asking, guys, because Heiser is arguing that they're different from the other guys. Oh, you pulled me down, Doug. Can you put that back up again?
Yeah,
there you go. Okay, so Ron, you're an expert. Doug, you're an expert. What's an arche? What's the rulers up there? So people, I'm reading, not to us wrestling against blood and flesh, but against the archos, the arche.
Rulers.
What are those?
Just a general ruler. I mean, it's not a religious term. It just means ruler. So
okay, all right.
Yeah.
So you're saying like exousia could be a regular ruler, but an arche, you wouldn't think that would be,
so exousia is authority. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So
right.
arche is somebody who, like a patriarch, right? A matriarch, an oligarch, right?
Up in the stratosphere, so to speak.
Well, they don't have to be. They could be. Depends on context.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. In this case, he's certainly talking about the guys up in the
heavens.
The bad angels or whatever they are. He's talking about those particular beings.
Okay.
Sorry.
What about then the exousias, which is the authorities? That could be human.
And I take that to be, personally, this is my view, and I know Mike was here too, that would be the Deuteronomy 32 dispensing of the allotment of deities to the world. That's their role. Their arche and exousias, as it were, that they are in a geographical control of different parts of the world. That's how.
So they're part of the 70 then?
Oh, I don't know about the 70, but that's just tradition,
Okay, so we've got Prince of Greece, Prince of Persia. Would they be?
They would be. That's that idea. Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree with Ron.
Okay. So
Joe, we're voting you out, man.
Oh, okay. All right. So Cosmo Kramer, Cosmocratorus.
Right.
What are they? They're cosmic. They can't be on the earth.
Right. They are.
Right. Judge means krato is a judge. So
yeah.
But it's in the cosmos, so we all agree cosmos is another layer.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
again, I'm no expert, but the context is we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. So all of these entities are not flesh and blood. I mean, that
Thank
seems
you.
That seems to be kind of like grade school level, or ignorant hick Southern Alabama lawyer that doesn't know Greek level stuff.
Okay, all right, but you're reading the English too, there, Scott. So they're cosmic powers. They're probably, I would argue that they're in the Marome area, which is in the Hebrew. That's Isaiah 24:21.
The high places, right?
The high place. Well, above wherever we are, Okay, and then the next one after that, in darkness. So these are cosmic powers of the darkness. What does that mean?
Well, again, if you go back to the ancient world, we're finding, again, the gods of old, however you want to call them, they were known to be, sometimes they were called, gods of the underworld. Okay. Well, it's kind of dark in the underworld. It's a kingdom of darkness versus the kingdom of light. So again, I think, Joel, what he's doing is he's using a bunch of terms. Some of them may have a real distinction, but I think some of them might also just be synonyms to talk about what these powers are like, some of their different ranks, but I mean,
Why
it's
tell us?
exactly
Why tell
it's
us?
hard to
Why
it's hard
not?
to pin down exactly,
Right.
because then there are
The
also
scholars.
spiritual forces of evil. Well, I think they're all evil as far as we can tell, because that's where we flesh and blood people are wrestling with these guys. So
go out and fight. You don't know what you're fighting against, but just go fight. I mean, that doesn't sound logical, guys.
This is why we put on that's why we put on the armor, right? Because we're fighting a host of enemy that we cannot see, and they have these powers and they have authority. That's important to understand, that they do have authority. We come across that same idea of authority in Revelation, where that exousia, that death and Hades have exousia power, which is really authority over a fourth part of the earth, which is everywhere people live, mind you. And so they do have authority, and that's the whole name of the game. I mean, that's how Satan can even imagine he's going to win against God, is by getting authority. And so
Joel, what are you arguing for?
I'm arguing what Heiser said, which is that these guys weren't supposed to be born. They weren't supposed to be on the planet. There's no salvation plan for them. There's no earthly plan for them. They aren't listed here because they're not important. They're the demons, daimonos.
Yeah, I would disagree with that, because, again, God bless Dr. Heiser, but it's not fair to argue with a guy that's not here. But
well, Ron knows.
I'll argue
again, exousia, authority. But again, when you start from the beginning and then go forward instead of starting at the end, right? So Enlil, right? Enlil is Satan. Enlil has the tablet of destinies, by which he has authority over the affairs of men. I think that same tablet of destinies is the scroll we find in Revelation chapter 5. And when God, or Jesus, begins to exercise his authority over that document, well, then this kingdom starts to fall apart, right? And again, he has been operating on the whole basis of authority. And then he can give out that Enlilship. He can give out a slice of that authority to whomever he wants. How do we know that? Well, because he did it to Jesus. Hey, I know you're here to save the world. That's cool. But you don't need to do all that stuff. Just bow down to me, and I'll give you the exousia, right? Mm-hmm. I'll give you all this stuff. Just bow down, and it'll all be yours, right? Because I can give it to whomever I want. It's been delivered to me. So, on that side of the equation, Satan is the ultimate authority.
Hey, and just
I
real
think
quick,
Jason's right.
Hold on, Joe, hold on a second. I put this up real quick. Not that we don't know. Everyone has some opinions. Doug has a very strong opinion on this. Dr. Heiser, who's not with us, has a pretty strong opinion. Joel has a strong opinion on this topic from an overall.
I've had demonic fights.
Well, let me finish. From a salvational standpoint, or even understanding scripture, whether demons derived from Doug's position or Dr. Heiser's position or Joel's understanding, it's really irrelevant. We battle some evil supernatural beings that we can't see. They're in another realm. They can manifest. Demons did possess people. We can all agree on that. Nobody's disputing that. And this is just kind of if anybody who's watched this show, I've been pretty quiet because I'm ignorant on this topic. I don't have much to add, but we've got some highly educated people. Joel's pretty passionate about it. I'm not. But it really, ultimately, it doesn't matter. There are demons. There are these archons. There are these, high forces. There are fallen sons of God. There are. I'm going to start watching Saying Angels now that Ron pointed out that I hate that word as much as I do these other words. Mm-hmm. There are these fallen messengers, and they exist irrespective of whether or not they came after the flood, if they're the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, or if they pre-existed then. This is who we're fighting against. So that's all I really have to add.
And it elevates during Revelation times, and we seem to be getting close. Would we all agree that we're getting closer to the time of Revelation?
I think so.
Every generation thinks so, but
here we are. So, Joel, let me ask you a question. How do you defend your position that demons are different than fallen angels from a linguistic point of view?
Unfortunately, I'd have to jump back a slide here. Go ahead and toss it up. Toss my slides back up, Doug. So Dr. Heiser went through it this way. He said you start out with Genesis 6:4, the Nephilim, the B'nai Elohim mating with the Bat of Adam, and then you produce Nephilim. Apkalu, and Doug, I already ran through this, but you guys couldn't hear me. Do you know anything about Apkalu? What Dr. Heiser mentioned?
No, go ahead.
Okay, it's a chicken-footed type rooster-headed being from Babylon, cohabiting. So it's basically the same story. Genesis 6:4, same thing as Apkalu in Babylon, cohabiting. He's equating based on Deuteronomy 2:11, the Anakim and the Rephaim. This is from a Dr. Michael Heiser article. Then moving along to the left-hand side here, it's kind of a circle. First Enoch, villainous sons of God, Genesis 6:1-4, were not only called angels, they were called watchers. A link to the Mesopotamian Apkalu is transparent and unmistakable. First Enoch, watchers and their offspring were the source of demons. Heiser. Okay, continuing on to the left-hand side, lower left, they will become evil upon the earth and shall be called evil spirits. Moving forward, First Enoch calls them bastard spirits, a phrase used of demons in several Dead Sea Scrolls. Then going to the middle, the bow of all of this, a non-biblical psalm found among the Dead Sea Scrolls calls demons offspring of man and the seed of the holy ones, a clear reference to the disembodied spirits of the divine human offspring from Genesis 6:1-4. So what I'm arguing and why I'm passionate is because I've already had demonic attacks against my family. And I had to go to the charismatics, sometimes the charismaniacs, to fight and learn how to fight because I wasn't taught. And guys, I was a scholar at that point in time, but I didn't know how to fight. Okay?
But why couldn't they just be fallen angels? Couldn't fallen angels attack you just as well as a demon?
Because I would say in Star Wars, these are the drones. These are
But,
not.
Joe, I don't think any one of us is disputing that demons or whatever these entities are powerful and that they attack us. I mean, we all agree with that. But the argument that we're addressing right now is whether fallen angels, which there isn't a term in the Bible, and demons are different entities or the same entities. You're arguing that they're different. I'm arguing that they're the same. I've based my arguments on linguistics, and in my humble opinion, I think it's a strong argument because it's based on linguistics, based on Philo of Alexandria from the 1st century, who just said these are exactly the same thing.
I was going to say, Joel, you continue with your argument as to why this is important, because I don't think I heard the end
battle,
of it.
the spiritual battle. It's not just theory going forward, guys. As we start to hit Revelation times, it's going to be a horrible fight. And so you need to kind of know what your enemy is so that you're facing forward, because everything that Paul talks about in Ephesians is a forward.
Doesn't Jesus? But Jesus calls Satan the king of the demons, right? Yep. The leader of the demons. But then we see in Revelation that Satan has a bunch of angels. I mean, they're the same thing. They're all bad. We agree they're bad and they're powerful. Right.
Well, here's
we're talking about nomenclature. That's what we're debating. Nomenclature.
Here's a verse, Revelation 18:2. Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit. So again, you can make an argument just from that verse that there's a difference and a distinction between a demon
unless
and
they're
an
parallel.
Spirit. No, but because then let me finish. A haunt for every unclean bird, and that's something that does flap its wings. A haunt for every unclean and detestable beast, animal. So in other words, you have distinctions here. Otherwise, don't include birds. I mean, they're just birds. Some are made for food and some are abominations. Same thing with animals and beasts. And here you do have a distinction. And I'm not passionate either way on this. I think it can be argued both ways. And I would end up going, to Joel's point, it is important, but I don't think it's important where if they were manufactured and created by the sons of God in Genesis 6, or if they are the fallen sons of God. I don't think it matters theologically. We battle against them, irrespective.
I agree. Yeah.
Don't bring a knife to a gunfight. We don't know what fight we're going into, guys, and so it's about time for us to discuss it. Doug, pop me back up again with my my PowerPoint, please. So I'm arguing that there is a hierarchy of evil, that Hillel is Hasatan, but that's just a title. And then beneath him, based on Enoch, first Enoch, there seem to be 200 fallen angels. There's not a third of the angels falling. Maybe that's a future event. There are these cosmic dignitaries, the Archos, the Exousias. These seem to be executive level humans, but anyway, the point is, then the other terms, but there's also going to be a battle against the false prophet. And in many ways now, we're seeing the false prophet step forward. And we'll argue about that some other show. The beast, we don't know who he is, but he's separate from, and then there's a Gog player that's involved in the end times from Ezekiel 38, 39, and also Revelation. Nephilim, okay, which I would argue are the giants. The demons, I'm arguing that Heiser nailed this one. They're the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim because they're dumb, they're stupid, they wear masks, they fight dirty, they backstab you. I would argue
that they're dumb. How do you know they're dumb?
Because I fought against them. And so I would argue, based on basic fighting, that if you're going against Hasatan or whatever, if you want to call them,
it's like saying that humans are dumb. I mean, no, I've met some dumb humans.
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Yeah, we are.
But I've also met some really intelligent humans. You know, like you guys, you're all really intelligent. But I've met some dumb humans. Okay. So, I mean, again, I just feel like you're arguing. I think we're doing apples and oranges here, you know, and I just don't see the point. We all think there's bad beings out there, whatever you want to call them. However they got here, we think they're bad. But
Ron, what's your thoughts on this?
If we keep our topic really tight tonight, which is, are they two different entities? I don't think you can make a solid argument to suggest, based on solely first Enoch, that's the only proof text that people seem to have, that these demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, and that's the complete origin of them. Again, I just don't think that I don't think that floats. I mean, again, you have Philo of Alexandria. I think he's a really big voice. I think he's a huge voice, and you know, I don't think we should discount him. You know, he's saying that here's a guy that was fluent in Hebrew, fluent in Greek. Okay, you know, he was very much in the world of all this stuff, and he's saying that daemonia and angels are exactly the same thing. So, do you just ignore that, or what do you do with it?
That's you, Ron.
Yeah.
No, well, Joel, what would you do with that?
Oh, I will in a minute. Ron first.
You're on the hot seat, man.
Would be that,
I'm cool. Mercy.
That the culture of Greco-Roman, you know, Greek civilization mixed with Roman concrete gave us the Greco-Roman culture. That we have a worldview that Paul's living in, that has both the biblical author using daimon at times and the audience using daimon at times, and they agree, in my estimation, on what they are, and that is the gods of the nations. So that's my basic position. Do you want me to defend it again, or what would be the best way to? In other words, and maybe this is where you and I, Doug, would disagree, that you see something that happens at the fall, Genesis 3. I personally, and I don't want to open a can of worms that we don't need to, but I don't see a fall in the Bible. I see an awakening, that the humans awoke to something that they should not have known, but I don't sense the word fall in the text, nor even in the story. The fall to me is Genesis 11, when humans are given, as Abraham was given the chance to become loyal to one deity, and all the other nations became loyal to other deities. Now comes the problem. In other words, there was no problem of sin generally, as much as there was a problem of worship patterns. And the question coming out of Genesis 3 is, which deity will you worship? And after Genesis 11, it just it hits hyperdrive, and now we have deities being worshipped as patron deities all around the world, starting with Nimrod in Babylon, but then spreading around from there. I know that's another topic, but
yeah, we need to have you back on that one because that's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I didn't know that you disagreed with Heiser on the three falls. Wow.
Well, I do. And I told him this. I said, Mike, how do you know there was a fall in 3? How do you know there was a fall in 6?
Oh, I love his falls.
And how do you know that 11's a fall at all? Because, again, this is my read on it. In Acts 17, Paul says to the Athenians that God did this in order that they would search for Yahweh. So could it be that Psalm 82 and other places are not saying that all the gods rebelled? It's saying some did, some didn't, some are smarter than others. In other words, in my cosmology, just like as we're talking about, we've met some dumb humans, but also some smart humans. I think there could also be smart Elohim and dumb Elohim, and that we have in the history of the world.
And the fall could be progressive.
Yeah, that's fair. That we have,
what's like turning to the other side, turning to the dark side, could be a progressive thing.
Absolutely, I think AI is teaching us this, that the ability for us to create something that supersedes us, as it were, that might be touching on how Elohim can function. That they may be so intelligent on another level that we don't understand how they compete even with Yahweh on issues that. So here's the problem. We all look into the heavens and we don't know what's up there, right? We all look up above the horizon and say, boy, I wish I knew what was going on up there. So we're all test driving these ideas.
Let's pull this up. Oh, rats. I'm having problems with my pointer here, and that's probably why I was clicked off. Well, anyway, I was going to pull up Mark's question, but let's cover this first. So basically, this is from rabbinic sources. So the first one is the Socino. It's a Torah scroll from, probably the 40s or 50s, maybe 30s. But anyway, demons in the Syrian Shadu are the demigods, usually represented by bull colossi in front of palaces. Okay, so Doug's seen these in Babylon and other places. Okay, new gods. Shadim, yes. In the Hebrew, it's Shadim. Oh, there it is. Yeah, Shadim in the Hebrew. New gods, they're upstarts. So the reason why I'm arguing, and Heiser is too, that they were not created originally. They came after the fact. They're new to this. And it's Kadash or Kodesh in the Hebrew when we're in Deuteronomy 32:17. Dreaded not. You don't need to dread them. The intriguing thing is that they cite the Sair, which is hairy. It's a reference to Azazel and the hairy gods, or the hairy goat demons that are, it's Azazel, it's Leviticus 16.
Joel, yeah. I mean, so again, what I was describing about with Nimrod, who became Martu, right? That is essentially a new god, okay? Because Satan empowered him by giving him the tablet of destinies. There was some, father-son thing going on between them. And then in some way, again, I can't defend how Nimrod did it, but he did something pretty weird. And we know that by the time the children of Israel came into the land of Canaan, it was overrun by Rephaim, Zamzumim, Zuzim, Anakim, right? And we don't think that those are all different kinds of beings. They're the same basic class of giants, okay, whatever that means, right? It even says that, hey, these guys call them Rephaim, but the other ones call them Zamzumim, right? And the other guys call them Zuzim, or So you're like, oh, these are just different language names for the same kind of beings, right? So again, I think this is much ado about nothing, honestly, because I think once you get into the ancient languages, you begin to realize, oh, they're all basically the same kind of thing. Marduk, Martu, Martes, Mars, it's all the same dude. It's Nimrod, okay? We can look at Inanna, Ishtar, Durga, Ashtoret, all the different names for the same goddess, right? Different names because of different languages and different regions, but the same thing. Arose by any other name. That's pretty much what we're talking about. And I think these beings, by whatever name you want to call them, fallen angels, demons, daemonia, they're all the same basic kind of creature that, they're, and now we know that they're wicked, of course, but I just don't think you have a linguistic basis for your argument. That's my point.
Could we ask that question as open question. Is it possible that some of these beings are not as evil as we make them out to be? In other words, that let's say we have, again, going back to the gods of the nations idea, that some of these beings that were over different countries actually did bring their people to love Yahweh. Is that possible?
I would not disagree with that. You know, I mean, I'm kind of a black or white. It seems like you're either on God's side or you're on the devil's side. But
I agree. Now, you're not supposed to worship him. The first 2 commandments, you don't worship Gabriel, but Gabriel is a good guy. Michael's a good guy.
And so I would agree with you, Ron. I mean, what I basically think is that, you know, so Satan, you know, did his thing back in the garden and he was bad. Okay. And then let's say that, you know, he's now one out of umpteen million, you know, angels. Okay. They're all good. Mm-hmm. And little by little, he goes around and is kind of making the case. Hey, why don't you come to my side? You know, instead of you serving these humans, they could be serving you. They could be worshiping you. Wouldn't that be sweet? You know, and so I do think it was a progressive rebellion, you know, that Satan was going around and he was sweet talking these guys to kind of, hey, come join my side. And so the authority, the position, the role, and the office that these various angels, you know, had around the world, some of them may have turned to the dark side little by little.
Joel, do you agree with that there could be, even today, movement among the spirits and which side they take?
I would say that they come on as being neutral and try to befriend you. And so demons are constantly working at it. They're constantly, I would argue that the evil forces, whatever they are, many different types, are constantly monitoring us, observing us, and are looking for weaknesses. And
how do they work on your mind? Can they make you think thoughts, or do they approach you as a human?
Plant thoughts in your mind. They can't read your thoughts, but they can plant thoughts.
Are they like avatars in Doug's theory, or?
I hope they can't read our thoughts, but they can plant thoughts and then watch and see if we act on them.
It sounds like C.S. Lewis. No offense to him. I mean, Screwtape Letters was an amazing book, but you know, we got to be careful not to take Screwtape Letters as theology, right? That's a fictitious account of what one man thought was actually going on the other side. I mean, I like the Screwtape Letters, you know, it's very insightful, but we do not know that that's how it works. Okay.
How does it work, Doug, do you think? I mean, I'm not holding it to this. I'm just theorizing with you.
Again, I like to go back sort of to the original bad guy, Satan. I've done a tremendous amount of study on him in Corrupting the Image Volume 2. His basic motivation, based on my studies from Ezekiel 28, Isaiah 14, and many other places, is that God created him as the prime minister, sort of like Joseph in Egypt. All right. Hey, the only thing between you and you know, you're the top dog except my throne, right? Says Pharaoh to Joseph, right? So then let's imagine Pharaoh has a son. All right. Well, who's in control of Egypt? Well, Joseph is. Okay. Joseph is still running the show, but that son born to Pharaoh is going to outrank Joseph by virtue of being his son. So God creates Satan, invests in with all this power and beauty and all this wisdom, and says, hey, you're the top dog. You're in charge of my universe. Do a good job. And make sure you watch over this little place called Gan Eden that I'm putting you in charge of. And then God goes and makes Adam and Eve, right? And Satan's like, so those are his sons, but I'm just the prime minister and I'm supposed to serve them. I don't think I'm interested. And so he gets them to kind of commit spiritual suicide. Says, hey, why don't you eat from that tree? I think that is when death entered into the world. That's what I mean by the fall, is that's when death, corruption, decay, that's when it all fell, when it came in, is at that event. And that is when we became enslaved by in our authority. We gave away the authority that God invested in Adam and Eve was forfeited, and it went to Satan. And then it even says in the ancient text, it says that the Anu ship, Anu is the creator God. So Satan, or Enlil, usurped the Anu ship, and then he retitled it and called it the Enlil ship. And then he could give out portions of that Enlil ship, that authority, to whoever he wanted. And again, that's what he tried to do with Jesus. So, you know, so I think having done this, and I think if you were one of the good angels, and then you're seeing Satan having all this fun, and now humans are worshiping him instead of him serving them. Worship and server are the same word, incidentally, avod, right? And so, I think there was kind of this thing like, maybe I should, there's some pretty good bennies over there. Maybe I should go join that side, because, I can do all this stuff. And then this is when I think Satan sweet talked them as some more, according to the text that was found on top of Mount Hermon, the stele that was found up there. It was according to the command of the greatness personified bull god, Batios. Those taking an oath proceeded from there. And so I think that was an account of the 200 angels that came down, and they're like, oh, this is a pretty good idea. And the goal behind it wasn't to just, have little families. The goal wasn't to just, make Nephilim babies, but the goal was to make avatars so that they could, again, and I would suggest that when the angels went and mated with women, they were still on the good side. Okay. Now they had evil intentions in their heart. Don't get me wrong. They had very evil intentions, but they had not pulled the trigger yet, right? You're not a murderer until you pull the trigger. You might be an attempted murderer, but that's wrong, but it's not the same as murder. Okay. If you got the gun in hand, you're like, I'm going to kill this guy. And at the last minute, you're like, you know what? That would be wrong of me to do that. Then you're not held accountable. Okay. Now, if you tried to kill him, that's a whole different thing. But if you have a gun in your hand and you're like, I'm going to kill him, and then you go and you kill him, that's when you get in trouble, is when you actually do it. So the angels, still on the good side, they're like, I'm going to do this. And then they went and they did their thing. And that's why they took an oath as recorded in that stele that is inherent in the name of Hermon. It means an oath or an imprecation to do something. And if I don't do this, may this and more happen to me. So all of this is evidenced in the ancient world, in the language, in the Hebrew, in the Ugaritic, in the Akkadian. It's all in there. And, so that's where I'm coming from.
So Ron, I want to congratulate you. You have held our brother's attention for 26 minutes longer than when he's normally trying to shut the program down.
Yeah, you're right. He hasn't
and
shut it down yet.
The key being when my friend Dr. Hamp gets to geek out on languages and
right. Yeah, he's having his fun. Joel, you're not using languages properly.
So thank you for coming on. He hasn't even tried to stop the program yet. And
I do have to run though.
Oh, you do have to run?
But yeah.
Oh, I didn't.
Well,
know
yeah.
that.
I mean, it's late. I mean, I got things to do.
Okay. Can I have 2 minutes? 2 minutes?
Sure, of course you can.
Okay. All right. So,
Sure.
Ron,
Brother.
quickly first, when Jesus says you need to pray and fast, these demons don't come out. So there must be a level of demons.
I agree.
Mute demons. Okay. So you agree with that? Okay. So
he sees above the horizon what we can't see, and I
Right.
think he's admitting there's something going on up there that just pray harder for this kind. Yeah.
Okay. So March 4th. 2006, I'm driving home with my son in my vehicle. It's a big van, E150, and I'm hit by another van, and it smashes really hard. I'm going 55 miles per hour. He's going over 100, just smashes it. And it was frightening, okay, because he was flying, okay? My son is in the van with me and his friend. They're scared. And so there was this fear component going on. I was able to limp the vehicle home. My soon-to-be former wife, who really caused these problems, picked up my son, brought him to the hospital, had him checked out, brought him back to our house. We're sitting downstairs in our house in the entryway, and my former wife says to my son, and he's about 14, just got done with, that church gathering on Sunday night, and he goes upstairs to collect his belongings so that she can observe him that night. He comes running back downstairs about 4 to 5 minutes later and says, I'm going crazy, I'm going nuts, I'm going crazy, I'm going nuts. He describes something called shadow dancing, which is where the demons present themselves on his wall and start dancing around and saying things. And the limerick was this: we live in the light, we thrive in the dark, be around friends, and we won't come back. So I suddenly realized I'm in open warfare. I don't know what demon it is. I don't know. I don't care about the hierarchy. I just know I'm in warfare. So the point is that 6 months before that, I had seen, Doug, if you want to pull it up, it'll just show the picture real quick on my slide. That creature trying to make love to me as my wife started her affair. I was connected with my wife via soul ties, so that gave them the authority to attack me. And so the point is, there was an attack against me, an attack against my son, and it's personal, guys. And I realized my son told me afterwards that this demon or these demons had been attacking him for 6 months, and he could fight them off with his mind in most cases, but he was rattled that night. He had been in a nasty car crash. And so I'm telling people that this stuff is going to increase as we move forward into the end times. And it's demons are the lowest level. They aren't even listed in Ephesians 6, but there are spirits above that. And there they are in Ephesians 6. So I'm saying be prepared, people. And that means, study the Bible and faith, things like that. So that's what I'm getting at, guys.
I would suggest that demons is the overarching category of which Paul is describing there, right? Within the species of demons, you have these different ranks. So
then how could my son
I think it's fallacious to suggest that because they're not listed, therefore they're not even that important. I think that demons are what he is describing in their various rankings. So anyway, that's my opinion.
It's 8:30.
Yeah.
Okay, Ron, you were fun. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. We got to have you back on. We got to talk about the fall because that's
let's do that.
Yeah, I didn't expect that.
All right. Well,
we got how do we do that? How does the fall fit into the full?
We're not going to do it tonight, there,
no,
brother.
No. I'm talking about like how does the fall fit into a fully restored kingdom? Back to Heiser's frustration with prophecy and how the tension between the two systems, and both of them get it wrong and they get parts correct. So I would love to have Ron on to discuss that.
Again, my view is that God created a vast array of humans in Genesis 1, and then he made a hobby farm in Genesis 2 and put 2 humans in that farm. And when they ate of the tree, they were kicked out of the farm and they joined a world of humans that were already dying. So if we want to talk about that view, I'd be happy to give you.
Yeah, and how it relates to the restoration.
That'd be fun.
Okay. Really fun. Thanks, Ron. Stay on after the show here. For a minute.
Hey, well, thank you, everybody. We're glad you came.
Good to meet you.
Who's right? I don't know. I mean, you guys can be the judge. Always go back to Scripture. That's where the ultimate authority lies. So I hope you will, check it out in the Bible. Be careful not to assume things, right? Because sometimes we hear things and we're like, oh, that's biblical, but it might be, it might not be. Okay. I might be wrong. I might be right. But again, what matters is what does Scripture say? All right. So stay in the Word. God bless you. Thank you for joining us. And if you want to become a producer, go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp. You can give as much as you want or as little as you want. And make sure to check out Regenesis Code. It's actually a free listen right here on YouTube. So check it out. Regenesis Code. I will read it to you. And, you can take it along with you. Or if you want to go to Amazon and get it there, check it out. But, that is my putting it all together as best I can. I have more books coming and pray that we can really make this into a TV series so that we can reach even more people with what's coming in the kingdom and at the end of this age. All right. God bless you. And I'll see you next time.